Hey guys, Eldred Bird here. Pardon the sunglasses, it's a little bright out here and my eyes are a little light sensitive. Sitting in my car again, as you can see, just having a conversation with myself about the next chapter, trying to figure out some details and things. So I thought this would be a good time to talk about dialogue, since that's kind of what I'm doing here, is working out an exchange between people. Now, my wife thinks I'm a little bit nuts because I have these conversations in my head where all of the people live. You also have to pardon the noise in the parking lot. There's a few motorcycles that decided to sit there until I, of course, started the camera. Now they're revving. But that's the joys of being out in public. You deal with what you've got. But I wanted to talk about talking with your characters and doing dialogue. I have I don't know how this has happened, but somehow in my critique group, I'm kind of becoming known for my dialogue and for being able to present dialogue that is real, that sounds natural, that really could be going on between the characters and between real people. So I thought maybe I'd talk about that a little bit today and how I managed to accomplish that. And step one really is knowing the characters. The characters live in my head all the time. I have conversations with them, they have conversations with each other. And the key to that is really that I do know my characters. I know what they look like, I know what they sound like, I know what their body language is, because that's going to play an important part too as well. Because when you start putting in attributions, and if you want to be able to get away from the he said, she said, or things like that, knowing those things about them that make them unique help you to put in attributions that are meaningful, that show the movements, that reflect how they're feeling, how they're trying, the emotion they're trying to communicate, rather than just saying he felt like, she felt like, he looked like. You can include emotion. You can have that character sit up or cock their head or roll their eyes or whatever. It gives you a piece of what they're feeling. The other thing that I kind of like to do is I literally will sit my characters down in my head. I will let them have the conversation and I listen in. At that point, I know how my characters would act in certain situations because I've lived with them for a long time. And if you have a new character, well, you need to get to know that character before you put them in a conversation, because you need to know what are their speech patterns, what are what drives them, what emotion, where are they from, because that will affect their speech as well. They may use colloquialisms that other characters won't. And those are the things that kind of separate your characters, where you could even write your conversations. Sometimes if you do it right, you can write your conversations without the attributions, and once people know those characters, they'll know who's talking based on their pattern of speech, by what words they like to use, by what colloquialisms they use, or just purely by the emotion they deliver it with based on the words. When you start adding in the attributions, then, where you're putting an action in the attribution instead of just a he said, she said, now you're getting movement in as well, and you're giving more clues about the character and about what's going on. You can use those things to set scene, you can use them to set, like I say, the emotion. There's a lot you can do with dialogue, and one of the things that is nice about dialogue is it helps you avoid what we like to call the data dump, where when you're trying to set a time or a scene or a mood, where you just have 2 or 3 paragraphs of description, of nothing but just description of what was the weather, what was this, where is it located, all that kind of thing. You can work those things into conversation in a more natural way, and it doesn't slow the story down like those data dumps where we just stop, give you a whole bunch of information, then the story picks up again. If you work it into the conversations, that works out much better, because now the story pacing stays on track. And natural conversation, if you know how your characters speak, if you listen to other people, you can get those patterns. Now, there is kind of a limit on how far you can go with natural conversation, because if you really think about when you sit around and talk to somebody, there's a lot of stuff in between that really doesn't say a lot. We get off subject, we kind of talk in circles sometimes, we repeat ourselves. You want to stay away from that. Those are the parts of natural conversation that we want to stay away from, because those are the things that don't work. Even though they're real, they really aren't telling us anything. You want to write the conversation just like you hear it, but then go back and look. Does that dialogue move the story forward? Does it tell you something you need to know? Does it tell you something about the character, the setting? Does it bring out a piece of something that you need to know to keep the story moving forward? And you've got to have the pacing of the conversation too, the back and forth. If one person sits and delivers a soliloquy and the other one is just sitting there going, that really doesn't give you any pacing. It doesn't give you that interaction back and forth. So then what do you do if you only have one person and you need to do this kind of thing? Well, that's where internal dialogue comes in, where you can interject people's thoughts. I have a way of dealing with that in my James McCarthy series. James is alone a lot of the time, especially in the first book, before he encounters the family that will become his family. Once his mother dies, James is alone. So there's a real danger of a lot of data dump there, because it's all description. James is by himself. Well, in order to get around that, what I do is James has his alter ego, basically, his nom de plume. He writes under a different name, under the name of Josh McDaniel. So what I did was I built a personality around Josh, and that personality is in James's head. So now when he needs to have a conversation, he can have that conversation with Josh. So there's no one else around. We can still have that conversation, still have that back and forth that keeps the story moving, that keeps the action moving, and those conversations are worked within the movement of the scene. Now we're good. Now we have that exchange that keeps things moving, that gives us the information without doing the data dump and without having to have another character in the scene. So that's kind of how I deal with that there, and that's where the internal thoughts come into in things. Even if you're telling a story in first person, you can still interject those thoughts. Hey, John, nice to see you. And Elizabeth, hey. That's what I'm talking about with dialogue. Keep it moving. Make it sound natural, but not so natural that it's boring, like a real conversation can be. Make it count. Make sure, just like anything else you write, that everything moves the story forward, that it doesn't slow the pacing, that it gives you information that you need, either about the scene, about the character, about the location, or backstory. You know, that's another way to keep from dumping backstory, is work it into the conversations. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about today was you know, get those voices clear in your head, get those characters clear in your head, and not just the voices, but the way they act, get their body language, the way they look, the way they move, and really pay attention to that, because that's what's going to make your dialogue real and make your scene move forward. Work that action into the attributions. Don't just do the he said, she said thing if you can avoid it. Sometimes you do have to do it, but try not to avoid it. And if you have a single person in a scene, go ahead and keep that scene moving forward by letting them use those internal thoughts. Italicize something where they interject, you know, an expletive or some kind of a smart-ass comment. I actually tend to do that a lot. You'll find that that's where most of my humor comes out, is in the internal thoughts, because James is not someone who would say something in the real world like that. So generally those things are going to be on the inside, and they're going to be in the discussions with Josh. So keep that in mind, and use that dialogue to keep your story moving forward, to keep from doing those data dumps, and to really let us know what's going on inside those characters and what motivates them and where they're from. All right, guys, have a great day, and I'll be back again soon.